Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Technology Evangelist podcast. I'm Dr. John Fluke, and we're sponsored by Medidenta Digital. And today I know it's going to be an interesting conversation because I've known Lorne for years and years. In the early days of, I think, the internet, probably, Lorne managed to grab the moniker of the digital dentist, which left me stuck with Technology Evangelist. But he's an IT guy from way back. He knows his stuff. I've known him for at least 20 years. I want to say thank you for coming on and welcome to the Digital Dentist, Dr. Lorne Lavine. Lorne, how are you?
Thanks. Great, John. And I can't take credit for the moniker, to be honest with you. Back in the day when I was writing for Dental Economics, I think, that was the byline for the column was the digital dentist. And I said, you know what? I kind of like that. And I just basically appropriated it. So,
Nothing wrong with that.
so I can't take credit for it, but I am doing great. It's been a busy time in my life. I got married a few weeks ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Got my son off to college last week. So a lot of stuff going on in my life, but all good. No
A lot
complaints.
of balls in the air. So yeah, I know what that's
Yeah.
So, well, Lorne, I always start out these with an origin story because I think people are fascinated by, how people, names they know and people they respect, how they get to where they are. So tell me, how did you end up where you are today?
So I thought I was going to be a full-time practicing periodontist until I was a full-time practicing periodontist. I realized I did not love it. As you know, perio is a challenge to say the least. My family owned the largest electronic distributorship in Canada. So I grew up with tech my whole life. Never really understood how I could combine the two of them. And then one day I was, a lot of specialists, I had a satellite office. I shared a space with an orthodontist, and he came to me. He had gotten a quote for a couple of computers, and he wasn't computerized, and said, "Hey, Lauren, I know you're into this stuff. Take a look at this. Let me know what you think." It was a $50,000 quote for literally two computers for a guy that didn't know what the power switch was.
Wow.
And I just thought, it's too bad that dentists don't have a resource of someone that understands technology, but also understands things from a dentist standpoint.
Right.
And all of a sudden, this light bulb went off, and I thought, I could do that. And I started offering services to my referring offices, and they were telling some of their friends who were non-referring offices. I was getting pretty busy with it. I was working like evenings and weekends between patients. And then what changed the whole equation for me is that the American Academy of Periodontology in 2001 had a technology day. And the speakers were two people that I consider my mentors, which were Barry Friedberg and Claudio Lovato,
Right.
which I know you know very well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I had met both of them very briefly beforehand, and it was a 2-day thing. This was like I said, 2001. And someone asked a question about halfway through the morning session, fairly technical, and I think it was Barry that stopped. He said, I don't know the answer to that, but there's someone here who might. Do you guys all know Lorne Lavine? And they had me stand up in front of 400 periodontists, introduce myself. Thankfully, I did know the answer to the question. So within about 30 minutes, I had well over 100 business cards of people wanting to pick my brain and needing help because everyone was there for technology. And that kind of changed everything for me. Right around the same time, I had heard that California was passing licensure by credential. I was practicing in Vermont. So I thought I was getting my license. I gave up my practice in Vermont, moved to LA in 2002, expecting to maybe practice 3 or 4 days a week and do the IT stuff a day or two a week. Got there, sent in my application, and they responded, "Thanks so much. We have about 15,000 people on the waiting list. It'll be about a year." And I'm like, oh, crap, because I had done okay in Vermont, but it's Vermont. Now I'm living in the heart of LA with no income, which in retrospect was the best thing that could have happened. Within a week, Howard Ferran, who had just started the Dental Town website, reached out to me. "Hey, I've seen some of your posts. Do you mind moderating the technology forums?" Which I did. And then Joe Blaze, who was the editor of Dental Economics, said, "Hey, were looking for a technology editor. You can write an article a month. And I said, sure. And within a month, my name was getting out all over the country and it took off. So within a year, by the time I could get my license, I'm like, I didn't like Perio the first time around. Why do I want to go do it again? So um, it just took off. And, over the years, it's kind of evolved because, initially for the first probably 8, 9 years, a lot of it was hardware and networking.
Yes.
And then HIPAA became HIPAA, which I'm sure we'll talk about today. And then over the last number of years, it's all been about cybersecurity. And we still do everything. We do, hardware, networks, computers, monitors, mounts, sensors, all the stuff. But the focus has changed depending on people's needs. So I feel very fortunate because unlike doing perio, I wake up every day looking forward to work. And I still get to work with dentists every day like I did as a periodontist. And, it gives me instant credibility even though
Mhm.
having the DMD after my name has nothing to do with my IT skills, but
Right.
people see me as a colleague. I walk the walk, I talk the talk, and it's been a fun ride. So no complaints.
It's funny how things like that happen. Um, there's so many the old Bob Ross line of a happy accident where something happens and at the moment it happens, it either seems like not a good thing or it seems like, oh, okay, just another thing. And then it just takes root. And it's funny because I have 3 kids. None of them ever had an interest in dentistry.
Right.
And as I got older, patients would start asking me, so which one of your kids is going to take over? And I'd be like, none. And people are, what? They don't. I was like, hey, do what you love. I mean, that's what I've always, told my kids. That's what I tell my young patients when they're going off to college and they're like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I just always say, find something you love that you're good at and it's really not work. Then, you kind of get paid to have fun and, enjoy yourself. And the last
Great
thing I want
advice.
to do is,
It's the
wake
same
up.
advice
Yeah,
I, yeah, it's the same advice I gave my son when he's going off to college because he's interested in cybersecurity because I've done it and that's all he's
sure.
known. But I said, listen, Jake, I mean, find something you really love doing. The money's going to follow. Don't worry about that. And he's enrolled. I think he's thinking out maybe some video game design or some
Right.
cybersecurity. But I said, you know what? Take a poli sci class, take a music class, take business. I mean, just find something. You got a couple of years to really figure it out. So.
Yeah.
Hopefully he will, and that's the same advice I would give anybody: is just find something you really are passionate about, which I am. And I know that 95% of the planet probably are not happy with their day-to-day
Right.
careers, but I count myself in that minority who are very happy.
It's just kind of a little side story. My mom and dad, um, they moved to wasn't like a retirement village, but it was a little neighborhood of small houses. And I think you had to be like over 60 to live there. So it was all folks their age. And they had a neighbor who was an attorney. And he retired. And one day my mom was getting the mail and he came out to get his mail and they struck up a conversation. And he'd been home, I think, like 2 months. And my mom said, so how long were you an attorney? He was like 35 years. And she said, gosh, this has got to be a big change. Do you miss it? And he said, I hated every day that I went to that office. And I'm like, can you imagine 35 years of just being miserable?
No.
You spend a third of your life asleep, a third of your life, with your family, more or less, and a third of your life earning a living and unconscious and unhappy, or no way to spend 2/3 of your life.
Yeah, I wouldn't want that. And that's kind of the way I
No.
felt with perio. It wasn't all the time, but there was
Right.
more days than not that I just, because when you're in dental school or even in your residency, you don't understand that long term, the success of your procedures, especially from a periodontal standpoint,
Mhm.
are all about the home care.
Yeah.
I could do the best surgery possible. If that patient wasn't brushing and flossing, they're going to be back. And of course, the GP was upset because the pockets returned, and I was upset because I was supposed to be handling the maintenance, and of course, the general dentist wanted them back in their practice, and it became very frustrating to me. With IT, I do the same thing over and over. I get the same results over and over. So I can't, that's a much better scenario than doing periodontal surgery.
Yeah, for people like you and me, people that kind of I have sort of a thing for control, I'll admit. Um, it's kind of nice to, be in a field where, ones and zeros are always ones and zeros.
Yeah,
And a whole lot
exactly.
better sometimes. So you talked about a little there from the evolution of where you started of, hardware, and then it went to software. Um, and you did mention the big word that, every time people hear it, I think if you're in healthcare, you go, "Ugh," and that's HIPAA, or the one term that everybody freaks out about. And that kind of goes in with a lot of what you're doing now with the cybersecurity um,
Right.
side of things. How do you see the world in those terms today, as far as like the way HIPAA and security go together?
So it's the beauty of it is that you're really killing two birds with one stone. We jumped
Great
on
way to put it.
HIPAA pretty strong. People don't realize that HIPAA's actually been around since '96. The original privacy
Yeah.
rules, and then they had the electronic stuff, the security rule, which is 2009, and then the final omnibus in 2013. We jumped on it because it was the law of the land, and it fell so much into our wheelhouse of this is what we do. And what we found over time, for whatever reason, HIPAA doesn't move the needle with a lot of offices. We can't tell them, listen, you have a high chance of being audited, because the fact is you don't have a high chance of being audited.
Right.
We can't tell them, hey, if you get dinged, it's going to be for millions of dollars and destroy your practice, because that's usually not what happens to first time offenses as well. So what we did find, though, is that ransomware has absolutely gotten people's attention.
Mhm.
More and more officers are getting hit by it. More and more, initially, what people, maybe they knew someone down the street, or in their
Right.
study club, but it seems to be a very common occurrence. And the beauty for us as an IT provider, I'm what's called a managed service provider, MSP. It's a fancy
Yeah.
way of saying automation, that rather than doing things manually, we do a lot of stuff automated.
Right.
But pretty much everything that we do, with one exception, which is cyber liability insurance, which we still highly recommend. And we don't actually do the insurance. We just act as a middle person to set it up for their offices. But every single service that we do has an associated HIPAA law. So they're not really optional. And when we tell people, we don't, in our conversations, we're not really focusing on the HIPAA, other than the fact that we say, listen, you're a dentist, you understand the concept that you can't treatment plan until you diagnose first. So how do you know where you're at when it comes to HIPAA compliance unless you've looked and you've done an actual evaluation? And most people, unfortunately, don't know how to do that. There's a document out there by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's document 800-30. It's about 100 pages long. I tell people, if you suffer from insomnia, it's a great cure for that, because if you make it to the third page, you're doing good. But it's the Reader's Digest version of this, what we already know in dentistry. You need to be comprehensive. You need to look at it from an IT standpoint, from a physical standpoint, from an administrative standpoint. And one of my pet peeves, unfortunately, there's no guidance out there. The ADA, in my opinion, hasn't done the best job of educating dentists about HIPAA and risk assessments. So if you actually look at the HIPAA law on risk assessments, there's literally one sentence. You have to do it, and they don't give you any guidance. And because of that, there's some companies that have popped up that what they'll do is they'll say, hey, go online and take this 10-minute quiz, and boom, you've done your risk assessment. And I can promise anyone listening to this that if you get audited and they say, hey, show us a copy of your risk assessment, and you show them that, they'll laugh and say, no, that's a funny joke. Show us the real risk assessment, because you can't do it in 10 minutes. When we do it for our clients, it takes about 7 to 8 hours. We're not on there the whole time, and we have software
Right.
that's running and all the stuff in the background. But it's a comprehensive process, and by doing that, you can get a much better idea where you're at, and then be able to address it. But as I said, if your focus is, I want to be as secure as I can be from a ransomware standpoint, and I'm going to do everything that I need to do, you're pretty much going to cover all your HIPAA bases, most of them. We never promise 100% HIPAA compliance. I mean, there's
Right.
700 pages of rules and regulations. Anyone that says to you, hey, we promise that you're going to pass an audit, or that you're not going to get fined, run, because that's just not the case. If an examiner comes in and they are determined to nail you, they're going to nail you.
Yes.
We tend to focus in my company on Well, we know, having had so many offices go through audits, we know there's a core list of about 8 to 10 things that they're looking at. And if you got those things in place, but they find other things, they're going to come back and say, listen, we know that you made a good faith effort. We're not going to fine you. We're going to give you what's called a HIPAA remediation plan, which is do X, Y, Z. We may come back at some point. We may not let you know when we're coming back. Make sure you have it done. And that's it, because they know that you've made that effort.
Hmm.
If they pop in and they say, hey, show us a copy of your risk assessment and your HIPAA management plan, and you don't have anything, I know as a fact, having had the experience, that it goes downhill quickly from there.
Yeah.
So I guess it's kind of a long answer to your question, but it's kind of like I said, it's the beauty of HIPAA and cybersecurity that if HIPAA is not going to move the needle for you, cybersecurity really should. And the things that you're going to do to get yourself secure are going to get you pretty much HIPAA compliant as well.
You know, in all seriousness, that's a great way of looking at it. I'd never had anybody seriously ever say that to me before. But it really is true because if you're protecting yourself from outside threats, that's basically the whole thing of, HIPAA says don't let anything get outside that's confidential. And if you're protecting, what you have from outside threats, you're basically doing. I never had anybody say that to me before. That's really enlightening.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
the whole concept of HIPAA is pretty simple if you think about it. I mean, patients are entrusting us with their very personal information, their social security numbers and credit card information and all that stuff. They have a reasonable expectation that we're going to do everything in our power to protect and secure that data. That's the whole basis of HIPAA. Of course, the devil's in the details, but it's not a difficult concept for people to understand that, hey, we got to make sure that no one gets a hold of this. And as we've gone more electronic and records have become more chartless and paperless, it becomes more of an issue that you just need to take proper steps to make sure that no one gets access to that data. But it's how you do that really is the
yeah.
challenge.
Well, and I think I've written about this in an article, but I don't know that I've ever discussed it in public before. But um, the whole thing with ransomware, I had it happen to me. Now, it didn't happen in the office. It's actually kind of an interesting story. I had a company that was manufacturing what they call NAS, network attached storage devices. Basically a hard drive that sits on your network and you can store stuff on it. And I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it. So I put it on my home network and it was just sitting up here plugged in to my hub. And it was on for about 2 days. And I accessed it a couple of times and looked at it, saw how much space is on it and all this kind of stuff. And I thought, okay, I'm going to play with it and tinker with it later. And about probably a week later, I went to access the thing. And when I did, what I got on my screen was a ransomware notice.
Wow.
That somebody had already been into this thing and, we've encrypted all your data, and, contact us with Bitcoin. And I kind of snickered to myself because I was like, there's nothing on it. So all I had to do was reformat it. But, this stuff happens. And that's the thing I think that people really maybe need to be aware of is that the people out there that are now doing ransomware, it's not some high school kid that thinks, oh, this would be funny, to play this prank. It's not, kitty hackers anymore. These are people that like have Lorne Lavine level of knowledge, that they're professionals and they know how to get into this stuff. And you need a professional to keep them out.
What we're seeing is hopefully some people that are listening to this are familiar with a concept called software as a service, where
Mm-hmm.
you don't buy software, but you kind of lease it or you're using it cloud-based, a lot of cloud software. So that what we're seeing over the last couple of years is ransomware as a service, where there are these criminals that will create the ransomware and they will then lease it to other people to say, hey, you can go ahead and use our software and you pay us a percentage of the collections. So it's absolutely a big business, and ransomware is scary stuff. It's rare for us, even with all our knowledge, it's rare for us to have an office that's going to recover in less than 2 or 3 days. Because it's one thing to recover from a backup, which is relatively easy to do. It's another thing to make sure that you've removed the ransomware completely in the first place.
Right.
And that's a challenge. So yeah, it's there was a time where people thought, oh, what are the odds that it's going to happen to me? People
Right.
think that, well, I'm a solo practitioner and I'm small potatoes. These people, they don't want me. There is
Right.
nothing more valuable on the black market than a patient record. Because as I mentioned, it's got everything. It's got social security numbers and phone numbers and addresses and oftentimes facial photos and all this stuff. It is unbelievably valuable. I saw somewhere, I think it was an article in Forbes recently that they talked about the value of a patient record is like 5 times more than anything else out there on the black market. So, and of course, dental offices for the most part are easy targets because most of them don't have, I mean, other than the ones that work with me, of course, but most of them don't have sophisticated IT monitoring. And, a lot of people, because, you figure, okay, I'll slap some antivirus software on here, or I'll do a little research online and I'm good to go. The days of throwing just antivirus on your computer and be done, unfortunately, are long gone. It is
Agreed.
way more sophisticated now. We're seeing a lot of what's called zero-day viruses,
Hmm.
which basically means that the virus is so new or it exploits a vulnerability that people didn't know existed beforehand. So your antivirus software, your firewall doesn't know that it's a virus, doesn't know what to do with it. So there's a new type of service that we've been installing for about 5 years now for our clients called application whitelisting, which is basically a whitelist. It says, okay, here's all the things that we know. We're going to scan your network. Here's all the programs that we think are perfectly good software to be using, and anything that's not on that list can't run.
Hmm.
And since that time, since we started using that type of software for our clients, we have yet to see a single virus hit any one of them. That's not something I could have said prior to that. We had a lot of examples of people getting hit with viruses. But that's, like I said, it's the things that you would normally say, okay, well, I need to patch my software and I need to have a firewall in place and I need to have some anti-ransomware and antivirus. That may not even be enough. That you may need something like an application whitelisting or more sophisticated means because, it's kind of like a game of whack-a-mole because,
Yeah.
we keep coming out with new solutions to these viruses and they keep developing new ways to hack into our systems. So we're never ahead of the game. It's they're the ones that are always got, a leg up on us.
Yeah. And the the whole ethics of the people that do that, it trouble me a lot. I have a good friend of mine that works in the cybersecurity industry. He doesn't work in dentistry, but I him and he'll be like, take a look at this. And it's normally what he sends me is the health. He's with a huge company, but it'll normally be a healthcare situation, that's been hit somehow.
Right.
And one of the ones that he sent me, which I said, me just talk about the morals of the people that do this, but they had gotten into a plastic surgeon's office. And you can imagine the kind of pre-op and post-op photos that, they need to have for their record keeping and other things. And they created a website with several full body nude photos of patients. And then they emailed every one of the patients and basically told them, this is a small sample of what we have. You know, tell the office to pay us now, or, these are all going public. I mean, it's just horrible stuff. I can't even imagine it. For me, the Midwest Catholic guy, just my conscience of, you know, being able to do something like that or thinking that I'm caught in the middle of that would just be horrible to comprehend.
So there's actually terms for that. It's double and triple extortion. So back in the day, the way that it was dealt with is that you'd have a ransomware. There'd be a pop up on the screen. You were told to pay it. Well,
Sure.
a lot of people, especially our clients, for example, they have a good backup and disaster recovery system. We get the virus off there, we restore it, they're good to go. So the next step is, which is the double extortion, is they'll come back and say, "Hey, we didn't get your payment. We're going to put all your patient information up on a website. you may decide, you know what, I'm going to roll the dice because how many of my patients know about those websites, whatever.
Right.
So what you described is what's called the triple extortion, where they say your database wasn't encrypted. We have information on all those patients. We're going to start calling them up or emailing them, let them know that, you know, we have a lot more of their information and you're refusing to pay.
Yes.
So one way or the other, they're going to find a way to get you.
Gosh, that's just like I said, that's just horrible stuff. I when I saw that, I was like, my hair stood on end. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine. So, and then the other one other thing is if we haven't talked about enough bad stuff, although this doesn't involve nudity, um, there are now I've seen lawyers that watch for these kind of things to happen, and then they start reaching out because of a class action suit, contacting patients and saying, hey, if you were a patient in this office, let us know. And so in addition to the HIPAA and the downtime of your office and having to restore, and can I restore, and all the, unless they're clients of yours,
Right.
but and then you've got the potential for these lawsuits on top of the loss of revenue from being closed, the potential fine situation. You've got to go through that, and now you've got the potential for class action lawsuits. It's just what I've been saying for a long time, Lorne, and you probably have been too, is I preach to people cybersecurity is like insurance. I don't have car insurance because I think I'm a lousy driver and I'll hit somebody. I have insurance in case something happens. I have malpractice insurance, not because I think I'm lousy at what I do. I'm going to end up in court. I have that in case something goes wrong and you end up in that. And that's the way I want people to look at, dealing with cybersecurity is okay. So you're paying, a monthly fee, for the whitelist or whatever, but it's not I guess it is an expense, but it's not expensive. Nowadays, it's just a cost of doing business, just like property insurance and malpractice insurance and all of that.
Right. And that's the way we use that exact analogy, car insurance. We tell
Okay.
people, listen, there's a good chance that you may never need your car insurance. The one time that you do, you're going to be awfully
Yep.
glad that you've got that in place. And it's the same thing with all the things that we do for our clients. We hope, and the vast majority of our clients have never been hit with a ransomware or virus or suffered a HIPAA breach or anything like that. But for the ones that have, they were awfully glad that they had it in place. So yeah, it's you just have to take that approach. And one of the most difficult challenges that we have when we work with our clients, because most of our clients are on some type of package of services with us, it's a yearly contract, and
Right.
we will call them up and say, hey, it's time to renew, and they say, hey, we didn't think we really, we're not sure if we're going to renew because we didn't really need you guys. And we said, well, actually you did. And we've got, pages and pages here of audit
Right.
logs and everything we're going to send to you, but you don't know about it because all this stuff is happening behind the scenes. You don't realize, how much you were at risk and how many things that we had to deal with. So, a lot of people, I think, just kind of like bury their head in the sand, like, well, I don't see it, so it must not be happening. But
Right.
and it's interesting, you made a comment earlier about the thing with the NAS. That is something that kind of bothers me, is that most of the products out there that are designed for security, when they ship, the security is turned off by default. You get a router, you get a fire, or whatever, it's disabled by default. And if people don't know, hey, I got to turn this on, I got to flip the switch here, they may be living in a fantasy that, hey, I'm protected, and not realizing, no, I don't have anything in place.
Yeah.
So,
I've got this
um,
great firewall that I paid a lot of money for, and it's the best one on the market, and it's turned off. You
right,
know,
exactly.
yeah. So it's
Fun
interesting
times.
stuff. So, yeah. So kind of sticking with the security deal. Um, how about nowadays? We're seeing a lot of data flying around between offices, which that doesn't really concern me too much. If you vet your specialists and you're
Right.
communicating in an encrypted way, it's not that big a deal. But what about communication with labs? There's a lot of digital stuff being done now. People are sending scans and them images and stuff. Talk about that a little bit for me.
Yeah, the one piece of advice I would give everyone is really do your research with those vendors that you're working with. And the basic rule of thumb is it has to be encrypted. Encryption, when it comes to email, used to be more of a pain because the way that most of the systems were set up was that you would send an email to somebody, they wouldn't get an actual email. They get something like, hey, Dr. Fluke, I sent you something. Click here. You'd have to enter your username and a password or create one. It was a pain. I mean, we understood that. And that's one of the challenges with HIPAA and cybersecurity is that the more secure that you want to be, the bigger pain in the rear is going to be. So, people have to keep that in mind. We always look for with our clients, what's that sweet spot? Where's that balance of, really good security versus not having to have a major pain in the butt to have to do it, every time.
Yeah.
So, but it's an ongoing challenge that we face with people to understand, what's going on here. So it basically everything has to be encrypted. There are HIPAA laws about this. Really, from your peace of mind, email's gotten a lot better. That a lot of the systems now we use a company called AppRiver. But if you have Google, Gmail, not the free version, but the paid version, because you do need to have what's called a business associates agreement, a BAA signed with any company that has access to your data. But having all those things in place, you are going to be in really good shape, as far as encryption. But the challenges with labs, for example. So a lab is one of the things that people mistakenly think is that a lab is a business associate, and it's not. So as a dentist, you're what's called a covered entity, and you are responsible for the patient information that's in your practice. You have people that are associated, affiliated with you that have access to your data. They are considered business associates, and you have to have that signed agreement. The exception is for anyone that is part of the continuum of care. They are not considered a business associate. So a referring office, a lab, an insurance company, a clearinghouse, none of those are considered business associates. You don't have that with them. So because of the fact that there isn't a agreement between you and the lab, you need to make sure, again, just as you're securing the data that's at rest in your office, you need to make sure that the data that's in transit is also secure. Basic rule of thumb that we find is that when it comes to sharing data with other offices, with labs, is that the free ones usually are not secure, and the ones that you pay for usually, you're paying for that privilege of having the security. But I would highly recommend it. At the end of the day, if something happens to that data, you're the covered entity. The buck stops with you. So you're the last person that's really going to be responsible for that patient information.
Okay, let's switch gears a second and throw you down another rabbit hole, hopefully. Let me think about this, 2023. Yeah, it was 2 years ago. February 2023, Chat GPT went live.
Yep.
And you couldn't go to a website, turn on the TV, or heaven forbid, pick up a newspaper, because they do still exist, and not see something about artificial intelligence. Now we're up to what, GPT-5, I think it is.
Correct. Yeah.
Where do you see all of this going in society, but then, tunneling down a little bit in the profession of dentistry as well?
Yeah, I think the problem is it's kind of, I'm trying, what's the expression? The Pandora's box, I guess.
Right.
I,
Yeah.
from the dental applications I've seen out there, the Overjet and Pearl and all these great companies, I mean, it's just fantastic what it can do. I think from a diagnostic standpoint, from a practice administration standpoint, it is unbelievable what AI can do. And I would highly encourage people to do some research, look into some of these products that are out there to make your life a lot easier. I use ChatGPT in my own business just to come up with plans for people. I can't use it yet for my article writing because it still doesn't have my flair to it. There's been a couple of times where I said, "Hey, ChatGPT, write an article on this," and I look at it and said, "No, this sounds too generic. It
doesn't sound like Lorne wrote it. That's kind of
you can tell.
I wanted to write with my voice, and I don't see that either."
Right. So I don't see that ever happening. But I think it's a double-edged sword, and I get very worried with some of the things I've seen out there. I think it was Google that came out with a video AI that's it's limited to like 6, 7 seconds, but it is really hard to tell that you're looking at something that's fake. You know, these deep fakes that are out there now, audio, all of that can be simulated, and I really worry about it from just from a dentist standpoint, but societal standpoint. I mean,
Yeah.
when we get to a point that we can no longer tell what's real and what's fake, I think media is going to be it's going to be a big problem, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree. And when you said the thing about, the deep fakes, here in Kansas City within, I think it was just within the last year, but I know it's been in the last two since AI's exploded, that one of the local religious high schools run by church, um, somehow or another, several of the families that, had students got a voicemail from the principal saying horrid things, and it turned out it was all an AI deep fake that somebody had created. And that, like you said, that's the frightening part, is when you can't see the difference, or you can't hear the difference. I always think of when Photoshop came out, and what was it, maybe in the 90s. I remember that I saw an article on a tech website, or maybe even back then it might have been on a tech magazine, but they said you can't believe what you see anymore. And I still remember it was a photo of Ronald Reagan and Muammar Gaddafi standing with their arms around each other, both were in prom dresses. You know, and yeah, you're right. It's just gotten worse to the point that, I mean, anybody can generate stuff now, and it frightens me. I mean, it's got some great things,
Yeah.
but it I don't know
Yeah.
how we
Yeah.
read.
How do you close the door on that? Because
Yeah.
it's out there. So it is definitely scary. But I'm curious to see how what the next few years looks like. But I see so much of it, and then, I was reading on the news recently about this deep fake. Someone convinced a woman that he was Brad Pitt, and
Oh my
it was
gosh.
like a romance scam, or whatever, and got her to send like $800,000, and it's just, yeah, like, we just keep talking. We use the word scary, but I don't know another word to use.
Well, and I mean, as long as probably there's been the internet. I mean, I've read stories. I read them on like CNN and the New York Times, and I mean, lots of legitimate places of these scams. I haven't honestly heard of one yet or read about one. Doesn't surprise me with AI, but there's lots of things, where somebody will get a text message or an Instagram from somebody, and oh, you seem really interesting, and they suck you in. and
Yeah,
and there was a there was a story in the New York Times I read within the last year where some man had actually given like $3.2 million to somebody. um
crazy.
yeah, and then when you think about pairing this with the ability to, you know for you to hear anything they want you to hear, or to see anything that they want you to see, that's, yeah, scary. I mean, it really
Yeah,
truly is.
yeah,
And again,
it
you
is.
can't put the genie back in the bottle, so I don't know
Yeah,
where it goes from here. It's kind of
it'll
like
be
the
an
whole
interesting
gene
few
editing
years, that's
thing.
for sure.
Yeah. Well, and it goes to show you too just how fast this has evolved. I mean, I remember, for me, the first time I saw AI in radiography, it was 2016. And it was a startup company that is no longer around. They ran out of funding. But I was, looking at their AI stuff and kind of helped training it to read bite wings. And it was just the coolest thing in the whole world. And I still think that the radiographic help, with like Pearl and Overjet and NVIDIA, all of those are really incredible tools. The one thing that I do wonder a little bit about is I know that now third-party payers are using AI.
Yeah,
And one of the questions I have for that is, are they using the same, like training and everything else that we're using? Are they just, paying for, a company's, access to the company's,
all right.
software to load things in there? Or do they have one that's trained to see differently than I do? You know, because you know as well as I do, they pick up lack of density on the radiograph, but if they say, don't pick up until it's like this bad,
Right.
then you run the risk of it going the other way. I really think for that kind of stuff, I'd like to see some type of an audit company that they're required to.
Sure.
I mean, there are accountants if you companies get audited, by their accountants routinely to make sure that everything's on the up and up, that everything's going where it should go. I would like to see something like that for at least in dentistry to make sure that we're all, playing on the same field and not,
Yeah,
some other
I agree.
field, yeah,
Yeah, I
has been
agree.
put together.
Yep. We've come a long way since Logicon caries detector, and that's
Yeah,
it's unbelievable how developed things are becoming. And that's the good start with AI. I mean, I love
yeah,
that stuff.
I do too. I do too. We've been using Pearl since January of 23. And I mean, it's just a game changer. In fact, it's
Yeah.
kind of a funny story. When I was helping this little company back in the day, one day they called me and they said, "Yeah, we just want to give you a heads up that you won't be able to use it after Friday." And I was like, "Oh, when you get back online?" I figured they were doing an update or something, and they were like, "No, we're out of money. We got to shut down." And I was like, "What?" Because in probably the 3 months I'd been working with them, I had I was like, I don't want to work without it anymore. I mean,
Yeah.
it's that good now.
Yeah, I agree.
Anyway, so where do you see things going in like the next? Give me a 5 year idea of where you think. I'm not going to hold you to this because I've been forced to write top 10 articles my whole career, and every
Yeah.
once in a while I get one right. So I'm not going to hold you to. I'm just kind of curious with your perspective.
Yeah, I think cybersecurity, if it could be any bigger than it is right now, it will be. I see ransomware, and I think a lot of these criminals are using AI to
Yep.
develop what they do. So I think it's
Hmm.
going to get a lot worse before it gets better. I think AI is going to continue to explode in our industry and in the whole world. HIPAA is HIPAA. I don't necessarily see a whole. I mean, it's interesting with HIPAA because the final omnibus rules were passed in 2013, but every year when the software that we use to do a risk assessment is constantly being tweaked based on what the auditors are looking for, new
Right.
interpretations of the rules. So even though the actual rules haven't changed in over a decade, there's still new ways of looking at it. But listen, from my standpoint, as this is what I do for a living,
Yeah.
I'm not retiring anytime soon because I'm going to be busy. I love what I do, but I just see more of the same, and who knows what's down the pike. It's like I said, I think some of it's very scary, some of it's really exciting. That's the beauty about, I know that you and I and Marty and John, and Paul. I mean, we're all sort of on we're on top of this on a daily basis, and
Right.
it's unbelievably exciting. I mean, it's never boring. There's you blink and there's something new that's out there, but it's going to be a fun ride.
Well, since we talk about the bad stuff about I do want to bring something good about AI is that I think one of the changes that dentistry is going to see in what's happening now, but it's only going to accelerate, is the whole thing of doing a lot of design and creation of things in your office with mills and printers. And the I don't if you're a busy guy and I don't expect you to say yes, but have you looked at any of the design programs at all out there, Lauren?
No, not many.
Okay, I was just curious. The one thing that's amazed me is when I first saw 3D printing in dentistry, I think it was 2017. I know it was the last time the ADA meeting was in Washington, D.C. And I was looking at these, digitally printed dentures and stuff, and I was just blown away. And I asked him, how do you design this? And they opened up, I think it was Blender, it's kind of like Photoshop for 3D.
Yeah,
And it was really complicated. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is, you know, this is going to be hard to find traction in the industry. But what I've seen in the last couple of years is that AI is now integrating into that, and that a lot of the design stuff, you can tweak it and edit it if you want to, but a lot of times you can just almost go into some of the better design programs and just click next, and it just does everything for you. And so that's the good thing about AI. I think it's going to help us
Yeah.
clinically, and I think it's going to help with people that are, like I said, trying to get into in-office milling or whatever, and they're like, yeah, but I don't want to spend the time to have to sit down at a computer, and draw or do this. And those days are gonna, I mean, you can still do it if you want to, but I think those days are really going to come to an end soon.
Yeah.
That.
Yeah, I
So
agree.
if you haven't looked at design in the last couple of years and you're thinking about it, look at it now, because it is really radically different.
Give me something to do. I don't, it's not like I have anything else to do during my regular days. So,
Yeah. So you mentioned that you don't do the insurance part of it, as far as like
yeah.
cybersecurity insurance and stuff. But with things like that, obviously you and recommend other,
Oh yeah, we set it up. We
ways.
we 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 get them information. Typically, for an insurance carrier, they just need to know the practice's annual production, and then based on that, we can get the quote for them. We're just facilitating it, but we always want to make sure people know we're not a licensed insurance
Sure.
provider or anything
Yeah.
like that. But
Well,
we'll set it up.
and it's really, I mean, we don't have to talk numbers because it varies, but it's not really that expensive either. That's the part that,
Most of our clients are 700 to 1200 a year, give or take, for full coverage. $250,000 of cyber liability coverage was usually enough for most practices. So yeah, even though I mean, it used to be half of that. And then of
right,
course, when COVID hit and everyone was getting hit with ransomware, it's jumped up. But I think it's still very reasonable, considering what you get. Because one of the things insurance will, there's two main things that it'll do. Number one is that if you do get hit, you're probably going to be facing some type of legal consequences one way or the other. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but the vast majority of dental practices who are hit with ransomware do not report it as a breach, even though it is by definition a breach. I know this because I've talked to people. I'm not advocating that ever. I just happen to
right.
know that most people don't know or don't care that they have to report it as a breach. So the other thing, as I mentioned, is you're going to be down for a few days. You want some type of policy that's going to give you what's called business interruption. That if you
Mhm.
normally produce $5,000 a day and you're down 3 days, they're going to reimburse you that 15,000 that you lost from that lost production. So, but like I said, I think I consider it to be very reasonable for what you're getting.
No, I completely agree with that. I mean, when you think about, you can, gosh, if you had to buy a new server for your office, for instance, you're going to be out a lot more than that, probably 10 times what that costs you right there.
Yeah, by the time you buy installation equipment, everything, shipping, it's not unusual for a new server to run 8 to 10,000, if not
Yep.
more. So yeah, that's pretty much par for the course.
So as we kind of move towards our wrap up, because we've been at this for a
Yep.
while, um, what is what are like maybe the top three questions that when somebody, is a new client and they call you, what are three of the things that they want to know? Are there like three common things? I'm just curious.
Yeah. So number one, am I doing enough to protect myself against ransomware? That is far and away the number one thing that we see out there. And the number two thing that we would typically get from people is, am I backing up my data correctly? Do I have a proper system in place that I can get up and running? The third one is usually how much is it all going to cost, but that's
Yeah, no, I get that.
Yes, that's sometimes that's the first question. So it just kind of depends. But yeah, people are worried. Am I doing enough to? And they don't. Like, again, usually when people first contact me, it's not, am I HIPAA compliant? That's pretty
Mhm.
low on the list. It's,
Right.
am I doing the things that I can and should be doing to make sure that I protect my practice? And in most cases, they're not. which is why we decided a long time ago that when we do an initial evaluation for a practice, we never charge. It takes us maybe 30 minutes. We hop onto their network. We evaluate what their systems are. We look at their backup. We ask
Yeah.
them some questions about their risk assessment and how they're emailing and all that type of stuff. We just find that we don't want there to be a barrier to entry for people to say, hey, I want to at least know where I'm at. Of course, we'd love it if they work with us, but if not, they've got the information to go out and talk with their IT people or find someone on their own. But these are like the most basic questions that I think people are asking us.
Well, and I want to kind of reframe what you do a little bit in kind of the doctor space or whatever. But if somebody comes in to an office and they need endo on a second molar and the roots are all 90 degrees and bent crazy, the majority of doctors, I think, when you see something like that, you would say you need to see a specialist.
Yeah, refer
And
it.
yeah, there's no shame in that. And at the same time, I know a lot of people out there, um, they have, like, oh, we've got, the local IT company, and they come by and, if we get a new computer, they do the install and that sort of thing. But, just like I'm not qualified to do endo on a second molar with roots going all over the place, I think doctors need to realize that just because the person can, you know, plug a cable into your computer and get it set up so that it knows, where it's going, that might not be the best person to trust your security to.
Right.
And that is where you come in with things like that. Because, I've known some people that have had problems with breaches, and they're like, I don't get it. The IT guy said I was good, but
Yeah.
the IT guy isn't necessarily the security guy. And I just think that needs to come out. I mean, you've
Yeah,
said
I
so
do
many
too.
things today that, you know, are like,
I,
yeah,
I, I agree.
absolutely. So
Yeah. And I don't want to sound self-serving because there are certainly some very good general IT people out there, but especially for healthcare, with
mhm.
all the HIPAA laws and all the cybersecurity, whether it's us or someone else, I really would highly recommend that people work with someone that specializes in healthcare because it's a moving target, as I said. There's a lot you need to know, and it's just really hard to have the local mom and pop shop people know
Yeah.
specifically what to do. Anyone can set up a computer. Anyone can configure a network. It's the stuff of keeping the bad guys out that's really the key thing that a lot of them won't have that expertise.
Well, and the other thing too I'll bring up is that when I see stats on like what industries are affected by this kind of security stuff, healthcare is always like in the top three, and
Yeah.
it grows every year. I mean, you may know, Lauren, is healthcare number one now? I think last time it
It
was
depends
number
on
two.
what survey you look at.
Okay,
Healthcare and banking usually are one and two.
okay,
Manufacturing is usually three, but it kind of just depends. But yeah, healthcare is always in the top two.
okay. Well, there you go, folks. If you need help, the digital dentist is your guy. Um, we're bumping up against the hour, Lauren. Anything else you want to tell us? Anything about, like tell us how people can get a hold of you if nothing else. Like,
Sure.
like if you're going to be out and speaking or whatever, go ahead and let people know
Yeah,
how to
I
find you.
don't have anything. I'm doing like a webinar for Greater New York, I think, or some New York society in the next few weeks. But the easiest way to get hold of me is to go to my website, which is thedigitaldentist.com. There's a contact us form there. You can just fill that out. We have a toll free number, which is 866 204 3398. Extension 200 gets you to Candace, my office manager. You can email me at Dr. Lavine, DRLAVINE, at thedigital.dentist.com, or Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. I'm on all of those. Just do like a digital dentist search, and I'll come up. And as I mentioned, we don't charge for those initial consultations. I'm more than happy for anyone listening to this podcast to say, hey, let me do an evaluation for you, let you know where you're at, how we can help, what it all costs. zero obligation. Anyone that knows me, that's worked with me, knows that it's not a high pressure sales technique or anything like that. I'm gonna no different than when I was in practice. I'm going to let you know what I diagnosed and what the treatment plan is. And at the end of the day, it's your practice, your money. You decide how you want to do it. But we'd be thrilled to work with anybody that's part of this podcast.
But they are still responsible for their computer hygiene.
Yeah, we listen. We always tell, listen, 99% of our clients are remote, so it's not like we can send someone out there to, plug in a USB device for them. We do expect them to number one, work with us. But we also, part of what we do is staff training. We think that's absolutely critical. People need to know how to recognize
That is
phishing
critical.
emails and how to. Yeah, and a lot of the stuff as far as like physical maintenance, we do that behind the scenes, but it still requires people to be diligent, and we show them, here's how to spot those things.
And I want to say one more thing on that is that, yes, that training bit of your staff, that is so critical. And I'm glad you provide that service, because somebody accidentally clicks on the wrong thing, and it
Yeah,
can wreak havoc. So
it's game
being able to
over.
train the staff
Yeah,
is critically important. I'm glad you offer that.
yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, Lauren, thank you very much. Gosh, we could do this for like the rest of the day, but unfortunately we can't.
It's okay.
So everybody, thanks for watching the Technology Evangelist podcast, sponsored by Medidenta Digital. I'm Dr. John Fluke. We'll see you next time.
Bye.